Hello, Bill.
Hello, Matt. Happy post-Valentine's Day.
That is right, Bill. It's after Valentine's Day. So many holidays. So many. What's next? I think there's something on
President's Day.
President's Day, and then you got St. Pat. It's like every time you turn around, a holiday. But I'm not complaining. I'm not saying that Madison Avenue.
This is not an appalling intrusion of the federal government into our work lives.
No, I think it's a shakedown to get us to give gifts and stuff. Not that I'm not. I am a huge romantic, as you know, Bill. Come on. And then there's a State of the Union, and all. There's always something.
Now, I know in many of our past chats, I think it's fair to say you're a Rubio guy. You've been big on Rubio for a while. Is that unfair characterization?
I like Rubio, and I think that he is very likely. How do you put this? I've used this analogy before. I mean, so like going into a football season, you might say, well, the Patriots are the most likely to win the Super Bowl. Well, they still might only have a 10% chance, but they seem most likely. You might have said that a couple years ago. And so I think that Rubio, if I had to bet, I think he's the most likely to be the nominee for the Republicans in 2016.
Does that still hold true now that he has drunk in a bottle of water on national television? Is he still the odds-on favorite?
I cannot believe the attention that got. It's explain it to me, Bill. What is it? I drink stuff all the time.
I have some Schadenfreude here because Democrats have suffered, overblown indignity after overblown indignity for a very long time. The Howard Dean scream, Kerry mispronouncing Lambeau Field, eating a cheesesteak with Swiss cheese. There's always stuff like that going on.
But let me stop you though. Let me stop you. Of the three examples you cite, the most unfair and egregious is the Howard Dean scream.
Okay.
And that was unfair because if you were in the room with him, I was not, but I've seen the video.
Right.
If you're in the room with him, it didn't seem weird. It was that they had isolated the audio, so that wasn't fair. The other two, though, I think, yes, they're superficial, but they say something about you. So if John Kerry, the narrative, the meme was that he was this sort of effete, elite liberal. Well, if you call Lambeau Field by the wrong name, or if you don't eat cheesesteak the right way, that reinforces a much more serious narrative. But the Rubio water drinking thing doesn't do that. It's utterly bizarre, and I don't understand why it became a huge story.
I think the potential subtext there is this kid's not ready for prime time.
Because he drank water?
Well, he was already kind of sweaty before. He was rubbing his face a lot. It's bad advance work just to not have that drink of water. If you know you're prone to dry mouth, you have the water on the podium so you can do a quick sip and no one really notices. Like you had to sort of bend down off camera and get it. It just looks sloppy. And you could say
but worthy but yes, it was a little sloppy, but worthy of the amount of coverage and outrage. I should say it is interesting. Rubio gave a big speech at AEI where he also, I think, took a drink of water in the middle. It seemed a little awkward. And remember, Paul Ryan drank a lot of water during his debate, and that became, I think, an SNL skit, possibly, in his debate with Joe Biden. But it just seems like such a small, trivial thing that got so much attention and commentary.
Well, it's all theater criticism, and theater criticism is not policy criticism, and I think there's all sorts of cases on the left and right where theater criticism is getting way too much attention. So I am on one hand sympathetic and one hand saying, what's good for us is good for you. But obviously, part of, I think, the Obama success has always been this combination of disdain and dismissiveness to what dominates cable TV news, while at the same time understanding that there are certain things you have to do to feed that beast and to avoid pitfalls. And so they're pretty careful with their presentation, which Reagan was famous for his advanced work, famous for his ability to communicate an image and a presence wherever he was. It was
I agree. I agree that image matters, and that if you're going to run for president, it's legit to discuss. And Obama has had slips, including 57 traveling all 57 states or whatever. The press hasn't really jumped on him very much for his gaffes. But I will say, I think it's totally legitimate to say that image matters and that politicians need to be concerned about stagecraft. But what I don't understand is, how is drinking water bad stagecraft or bad optics?
Well, it's just how if the water was by his hand and he took a simple break and just sort of quick sip, kept talking, it would have been no big deal at all. Is the fact that he had to duck that go off a frame to do it, which clearly suggested this was not properly prepared for. That it just looked unprofessional. And here's the guy who's being poised as, this guy can go toe-to-toe with Obama, this guy can be the presidential nominee, so to make a rookie mistake like that undercuts that whole image.
Well, I think you've actually hit on the point, which I think does. So if we can agree and accept the fact that it would have been nice if the bottle of water had been in a cup or a glass, and if it had been sitting, on a podium where he could have easily accessed it, that would have been preferable. But clearly, I think that does speak to advanced work. I still don't think it warrants the coverage and the obsessive coverage and the breathless reporting that it got. And I think it's more indicative of our modern media. Where so much is on Twitter and the need to fill 24 hours. I mean, in the old days, it might have made its way into a newspaper article, as an aside. But the standards are higher these days.
Well, let's accept that it's unfair, not terribly important in the grander scheme of things. But from your understanding, are Republicans now a bit more hesitant to rally around the Rubio flag? Are they concerned that perhaps he actually isn't ready for prime time or he's not going to get fair treatment because of this, and therefore they should look about elsewhere for their 2016 savior? Is there a defensive reaction where we're going to circle around Rubio and say we're not going to let the media tell us who our guy should or should not be, and we're going to focus on his ideas instead? Is that the attitude?
Well, I think it probably helps him with the base. I mean, the base. The conservative base, the grassroots, the Tea Party, were not 100% on board with his immigration proposals. And this, and oddly, helps him because he's being attacked unfairly by the mainstream media. And they saw, this is like the Palinizing Rubio. They saw how the press, Tina Fey, caricatured Sarah Palin. And so, this is the lamestream media attacking Rubio. So in an odd way, it helps him. But I will say the way Rubio handled it the next day, making fun of it, I think was better than the way Palin and Mitt Romney as well handled criticism. They declared war on the lamestream media, whereas I think Rubio kind of laughed it off and had fun with it. So I think this actually helped him on two counts. Number one, I think it caused conservatives who had begun to, some conservatives who had begun to be a little concerned about his immigration proposal to rally around him. And I also think it showed in terms of damage control. Because remember, it's not falling down that's the measure of the man, it's how he gets back up. And I think that Rubio's ability to kind of go back into the media, into the lion's den, and poke fun at himself, showed that he was different than Palin and Mitt Romney, that he would laugh it off and continue to engage with the media rather than, sort of recoil and we'll let other people criticize the lamestream media Rubio would stay above the fray.
Now, my one last Rubio question for you is, are conservatives happy with the speech itself? My sense of it was, it wasn't that unique a conservative speech. It seemed to be pretty standard conservatism, which and maybe that's fine from the conservatives' perspective. They're not looking for someone to do anything that's particularly out of the box. But do you get a sense that people think like he has found a special way to communicate conservative principles, and even if that got obscured this time, we have hope that he is still the right guy in the future to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was one. You just have to put it in context. I mean, this was one speech out of many that he's given. And the best pro-life speech I've ever heard in my life was at the Susan B. Anthony-less dinner a couple years ago when Rubio spoke about the life issue. He gave a big speech at the convention. So if someone who hasn't given a lot of speeches, one speech, one primetime speech or high-profile speech could be make or break. In the case of Rubio, I mean, it was obviously important, but I don't think it had the same urgency or level of seriousness that it would have had had it been like his only shot. I think the speech was good. I think it was fine. It's tough, you go up against the president, the commander-in-chief, all the trappings of the State of the Union, and they have standing ovations and multiple camera angles and shots and the cutaway shots while they take a drink of water. And it's always almost a thankless job. I think Rubio did quite well. The one question I have is, he pre-taped the Spanish speech where he gave the response in Spanish. Why not pre-tape everything? Like, is there a reason why the Republicans or the party out of power couldn't just pre-tape the response? That way you could eliminate any potential gaps. Is there an advantage or necessity to do it live?
Well,
I don't know the
if you
answer.
want to actually respond to something specifically that the president says, and if you don't have an advanced copy of the speech, you can't do that. But there's an
they never really
that
respond
you shouldn't
anyway.
bother with point-by-point rebuttals because that's a losing game.
I think that's true. Yeah. And there's usually not enough time. There's not enough time. If there's anything that surprised you, there's not enough time to really respond anyway. But look, let me say this, going back to your earlier point about it being sort of original or creative. I actually thought that the more interesting speech was Rand Paul's Tea Party response, which I don't think was even televised this time. I don't think, unlike Michelle Bachmann's speech a couple years ago. It wasn't
even on CNN.
I don't know. I didn't see it, and I know a lot of the networks didn't televise it. I don't want to say that it wasn't televised anywhere. I saw it on tape, and I'm guessing a lot of people consume their news on web nowadays anyway, but it certainly didn't get the exposure that past Tea Party responses had garnered.
Now, but is it possible, if conservatives heard it, I mean, I assume Rand Paul's running in 2016, the same way Rubio's running in 2016, and they're looking first and foremost right now to rally the base and consolidate that primary vote. Assuming those voters saw the Paul Tea Party address. It seems to me, I have some conversations with my Tea Party mother-in-law on these subjects. She is very partial to Rand right now, even though she is not a fan of his father. And she had said something to me that actually was that I was thinking about. She likes the fact that he said in that speech that we should balance the budget in 5 years. Which is now twice as fast as the general Republican position has been. I think Boehner said that their next budget is going to be a 10-year window. That is dramatically faster than what the initial Ryan budget was going to do. The Ryan budget wasn't going to balance like 2040. And it just said to me that, Rand can always plant his flag one tick farther to the right than everybody else. And he doesn't have to worry about what the governing consequences would be or the political probabilities he could actually succeed. He can always present himself as the purest version to the base. And, what are you going to do if you're Rubio or anybody else to criticize that 5-year window? Say, well, that's going to hurt the economy if you do that. Well, now you're in Democratic territory if you're talking about how fast going too fast is harmful. So it just seems like he actually has a good angle on consolidating the base that I think is going to be very hard to stop. So, presuming he can, keep a handle on, the crazier pronouncements that his father was sort of addicted to, and Rand seems to be able to heed a little more closer to just sort of standard libertarianism and not go half-cocked into some other. He's not going to go off on the gold standard, presumably. If he can do that, can he get 35% of the primary vote and be in the top tier?
I think that Rand. I wouldn't bet on him, but I think he's part of the conversation, and it could happen. If you go to the speech, I thought that Rubio's speech was aimed at persuading, independent voters that the Republican Party can be their party, that it's not an extreme party, that it's not an out-of-touch party. Whereas Rand Paul's speech was really two visions, and it was very much contrasting the liberal vision with the conservative vision. And I thought it was really quite good, and I thought it deserved probably more attention than it got. And it was smart. There is some elements of the Tea Party and the conservative movement do nothing but throw red meat, but they have no intellectual heft behind them. But Rand Paul, is obviously smart, and the speech was, I think, substantive as well as it sort of would quench your thirst for red meat, but also drop some knowledge on you as well. So I thought it was quite good. I think that Rand Paul, initially the idea would be to be a saner, younger Ron Paul, which is to say that you could run for president, keep all the Ron Paul voters, but also attract more mainstream Republican voters. And I've seen him actually in the past week have some problems doing that on both counts. For one, he gave this big speech the other week at the Heritage Foundation, a big foreign policy speech. But in the speech, he mentioned something that I heard him say earlier, which is that, and I'll paraphrase, but essentially that America helped fund and create bin Laden. And that's a controversial thing to say, and a lot of experts, it's by no means the accepted wisdom, and a lot of experts say that's just not true. That,
or they say wildly oversimplified to the point of being untrue. I mean, there's money that went to America, I think, to Mujahideen in Afghanistan, but where that directly funding bin Laden, setting up Al Qaeda is taking a few extra logical jumps. Exactly.
But I think maybe more problematic for Rand Paul is what happened just as we're taping this. I guess it happened Thursday night, where Rand Paul supported blocking the Hagel nomination. So you had a lot of Ron Paul supporters felt like Rand Paul should have voted yes on Hagel's confirmation. And my colleague and your friend Jim Antle had a piece up at the Daily Caller recounting all of the critical things Ron Paul supporters had to say about that. And one of them, someone, I think he's at Foreign Policy magazine, I don't have it in front of me, and I'll paraphrase what he said, but he said something to the effect of, he might be Ron Paul's son, but he's acting like Bill Kristol and Jen Rubin's boy. That's harsh words against Rand Paul from the sort of libertarian-leaning.
I see him walking a line there. I mean, he's obviously trying not to be seen as just a carbon copy of his father, and he's trying not to, I think, act impetuously on every last checklist on Ron Paul's checklist, particularly on foreign policy. He's not going to go to a Republican debate and lambast America for ousting the Democratic-elected leader of Iran in 1953. That's just not why I think we're. Maybe Rand Paul believes that, but I haven't seen him go out and say things like that. That's why I think he actually has a better potential to go farther in the Republican primary than his father did. But you can see he still had little bits of that come out from time to time, like with the drone comment and the Bin Laden comment. So how he balances those two wings of the conservative movement is going to be a fun for me to watch over the course of the next few years.
It'll be interesting, and we'll just have to stay tuned. But I think there could be a very interesting foreign policy debate to be had between Rubio and Paul if they were both running, very different foreign policy visions from two guys who were both. And it's funny that they were matched up against each other in these State of the Union responses. I mean, you have these two guys, both won in 2010, both beat establishment, mainstream, Republicans, who were supported generally by the Republican establishment. Both Paul and Rubio were Tea Party candidates, and yet they have very different foreign policy visions. And if, 2016, 6 years after their being elected as Tea Party candidates, they faced off running for president, it would be quite an interesting development, and I think that debate, these two different visions, would be very interesting to have.
Well, I could see Rubio,
the old right versus the new right.
I mean, I could see Rubio and other Republicans running, trying to bait Rand Paul into a foreign policy debate, thinking this is how we can stall this guy's momentum, if we can flesh out some of his less conservative foreign policy views. I don't see Rand wanting...
You say less conservative.
Well, that would be from their vantage point. They would try to say you are soft.
Well, I think that could be a big mistake. I think that they're, amongst the Tea Party and the grassroots, the folks who vote in primaries, it's, the sort of, and I have to be very careful with language here, because words mean things and there are nuances. But, I mean, I think it's safe to say Rubio's positions are more, JFK, Fox News, neocon, and Paul's positions are more paleocon, non-interventionist. I don't say isolationist because some people think that implies that they're not interested in trade, but non-interventionist. But my point, though, is you might assume, Bill, and a lot of people might assume that the conservative base is automatically in the hawkish, Barony Burden, Panny Price category. But I think that there are a lot more people out there, a lot more conservatives that in the modern Tea Party era who are in the Paul camp. Well, than we might realize. I'm not
disagreeing with that, but I don't think that Rand Paul is looking to highlight that part of his philosophy. I think he presumes that part of the conservative movement is not big enough to carry you forward to the nomination, looking at the evidence of his father. I mean, Ron Paul could take a debate question about health care and tie it into the disgusting policy of American interventionism throughout the centuries. And Rand just doesn't do that. So I don't think that Rand sees it as an issue to lead with. I think
he cloaks it. He's very smart about how he frames it, usually, with the exception of the Bin Laden thing. And by the way, here's why the Bin Laden thing is problematic. Because it implies that the Reagan administration helped create Bin Laden, and it's almost like blame America first. And the left, Michael Moore, adheres to that ideology, and so Rand Paul finds himself sort of in the Michael Moore camp. But aside from that, he has clearly tried to take steps to avoid being Ron Paul. including a trip to Israel and recently saying that I'm paraphrasing here, if Israel's attacked, America would respond or would take it as an attack on themselves, something to that effect. I don't want to miscast what he said, but it was something like that. So I think you're right, Bill, in the sense that I think he is aware of the fact that not that he has to avoid it, but that he has to frame it very delicately.
Right, and I think he's going to be much happier being seen as Mr. Debt, Mr. Debt Fighter, and trying to play and distinguish himself that way with the rest of the field. No one's going to fight debt harder and faster than me. That's going to be his strongest turf, and other Republicans, I think, are going to try to pull him off of that and get him wrapped up in some of these foreign policy questions, which are a lot more trickier to articulate.
I think what you don't want to do. I mean, we're talking about a potential primary that might happen someday. I think what you don't want to do if you're going up against Rand Paul is you don't want to get into the foreign policy debate where I think he could win. I think what you want to do is talk about some of the extreme positions that he's taken in the past. And I think you talk about his 1964 Civil Rights Act, the controversy over whether or not he would support that. I think you talk about the Bin Laden stuff, the fringy stuff. I don't think you really want to have the debate over America's place, America's role in the world. Should it be out there making the world safe for democracy? Because I'm not sure you win that fight with Rand Paul. In the primary, in the Republican primary.
Well, of course, a lot of these questions are hard to answer without knowing what the backdrop is going to be by 2015 and 2016.
Yeah.
Obama's State of the Union address is clearly trying to create a pretty liberal backdrop for the next race to be waged in front of. I saw the speech. I think also Michael Tomasky made this point in the Daily Beast. But when I first heard Obama say that we need to have available high quality preschool for every family in America, I tweeted it instantly that this is not something I think Obama expects to get on his watch, but he's setting a North Star for the next generation of liberals to pursue, akin to what happened with Harry Truman and universal health care, though I assume Truman actually did want to get it passed, but he had obviously a very conservative Congress to deal with. I don't know enough of the history to know what his expectations were, but he clearly did succeed in making that be the North Star that liberals have been fighting for ever since. And I thought this State of the Union address, combined with the inaugural, are clearly attempts to have and this goes back to what Obama said in 2008 during the primaries, that he wanted to be a president that changed the trajectory of America in a way that Reagan did, but Clinton didn't and Nixon didn't. And that was he wanted to emulate Reagan's conservatism. He wanted to emulate Reagan's influence and broader impact. And I don't see him playing just for a few issues over the next year. He obviously wants to cement his legacy and get stuff passed, but he's looking beyond that too. And assuming the country stays with him on that point, that makes the Republican primary, even more interesting, because they seem to be very disconnected from what Obama's trying to do. There seems to be a disbelief that Obama can succeed in furthering the liberal cause that far. So you're not seeing, if there's a Rand Rubio split emerging, it's not over who can best deal with the tug towards the left that Obama has put upon us. It's still about who can show they are the fiercest, most effective conservative in the room. And that kind of primary dynamic, assuming Obama is still on good footing by 2015, 2016, that might just be a recipe for a third presidential defeat.
Well, there was a really interesting piece in the New York Times yesterday, Bill, that quoted some up-and-coming young conservatives, including S.E. Cupp, who challenged us to call out Rush Limbaugh, and our good friend Kirsten Solstice. Am I pronouncing that right? Anderson.
Soltis.
But now it's Anderson, I think. I think she.
Yes.
But anyway, the reason I don't know that, she and I are rarely on together, but she's on usually when I'm not here. But she had some great things to say. I know you guys did a really good show. I think around I forget when it was. It was a holiday. No, it was right after the election when she came on and talked about polling that she had done of young people. And so it was a really good piece, and I think you're a little bit wrong in assuming. I think things have changed. I mean, you see Rubio pushing his immigration reform. It is fraught with danger, but I think the fact that he is doing it implies that it's not your. As I think National Journal, somebody recently said he wasn't your father's Republican. So I do take issue with the notion that Republicans are just all about showing who's the toughest. I think that's changing a little bit. The question I have for Obama, and I agree with you, Bill, I agree with you that Obama has these grand ambitions and wants to be a change agent. The question I have, though, the problem is if you look at Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden, you have a party positioned to take a step back generationally. I mean, I think most people assume that Hillary or Biden are the two most likely contenders, and you could argue that policy-wise, that they might continue Obama's progressive agenda. But symbolically, and I think so much of politics is about the candidate, they're a step back generationally. And it's hard, I don't know of this happening historically, but, after JFK, you take a step back. The Reagan Revolution ended the day that George H.W. Bush became president. And maybe it picked up again with Newt. But I do think Democrats have this big problem. And maybe you say that the JFK analogies is going to be apt, that LBJ was able to push through some of things that JFK couldn't have done, had he lived. I don't know if that's an apt analogy or not. I don't know if the Reagan analogy is apt or not. But I do know that Obama is very special, and that a lot of his skill isn't just about his ideology, but it's about his charisma and just who he is. And Cory Booker may become a U.S. Senator, but he's not going to be ready to be at the top of the ticket. Isn't it a problem that Democrats look like they're going to have to take a step backward generationally here?
I think it's a problem. I don't think they have. They haven't groomed the bench quick enough and fast enough to very quickly pass the torch to another, youngish, fresh face. But to your Reagan example, George H.W. Bush, was not the conservatives' dream of where the Reagan torch would be passed to. And even though the Cold War finally ended on his watch and they gave Reagan credit for it, they obviously weren't happy with the tax deal that Bush did, the Clean Air Act, his Civil Rights Bill. These aren't the Americans with Disabilities Act. These aren't things that I think conservatives were expecting the third Reagan term to be. But he did not reverse the trajectory. I would still argue, and others have, we effectively had a Reagan era that went from 1980 to 2008. Clinton, was obviously not a Republican, but he still played a lot on Republican turf and still had some very significant deregulation planks that happened on his watch.
No, I completely agree with you, Bill. I think you're totally right. My only question would be, what if there had been a Kemp presidency or a Laxalt presidency starting in 1988? How much more might have we done?
You have to explain Laxalt to people.
So Paul Laxalt was a senator from Nevada. I think he was like Reagan's best friend. He was a conservative. I think he's still around. I think he's a lobbyist or something in town. But Paul Laxalt was a very significant figure. And a lot of conservatives thought that he should have been Reagan's running mate, and that would have set him up to succeed him, possibly. Or Jack Kemp, who most people probably do know. But instead we got George Herbert Walker Bush, and so the Reagan Revolution, you could argue, yes, it continued because it was a juggernaut, but Bush didn't, facilitate it, didn't maximize it. And I think Obama could potentially be faced with a similar dilemma where, maybe the steam, there's so much steam that some of his policies continue and ideas continue, but not to the degree that they might if there was the next generation.
No, I think I looked at my Wikipedia while you were talking. Paul Axel, 90 years old, still alive.
Good for him. Good for him. I'd like to meet him. I would like to meet Paul Axel.
I think we're already being silly enough that we're trying to predict 2016. It's hard to predict beyond 2016. But I do think both either a President Hillary Clinton or President Biden would have some Obama wind at their back. I don't think there would be utter reversals or retreads, but they'd probably be they'd probably be one-termers, just on the basis of their age. They might feel they have the opportunity to do some things that someone trying to run for re-election wouldn't have to worry about. So maybe if Obama doesn't get the grand bargain that trims Social Security, Medicare, that Hillary or Biden might do something like that, which would be akin to Bush doing a tax deal or Americans with Disabilities Act or something like that. So there could be stuff like that that would give liberals agita, but it also might give the next class of Democratic politicians 4 more years to groom themselves and prepare and further the agenda afterwards, right. And have them. And even if that wasn't true, you might have a situation like with FDR where FDR passed away, Truman gets it. Truman has difficulties getting reform planks established. He does some stuff by executive action, which is historically notable, of course. But he gets tangled up in the Korean War, and Eisenhower takes in, so they were going to be losers, but Eisenhower's a pretty progressive Republican. And he does civil rights stuff, and he does invest in our infrastructure. So he doesn't go as fast as Adlai Stevenson wanted to do, but he doesn't reverse the trajectory of FDR. So,
well, I should note too, Bill. I mean, there is Cuomo, there is O'Malley. I don't think they have the charisma of an Obama, but it's possible one of them sneaks in instead of Hillary Biden. And then on the bench, I think Cory Booker, Julian Castro, if he can manage to get elected to something in Texas after next. They seem to be potential rising stars too. So it's not as if there's nothing for Democrats to look forward to, but clearly I think on the Republican side, with Rubio, Paul, Cruz, Jindal, Pence, Haley, Martinez, Cuccinelli.
You guys have more names ready to go. But if the wind's not going your direction, that's not going to matter as much.
This is true. So it will be interesting to watch what happens, and we'll see if that State of the Union is something that we look back on as significant, or if it's just like a lot of State of the Unions that everybody obsesses about them and they end up being yesterday's news kind of thing.
Right. We shall see. Always good to talk to you, Matt Lewis.
Good to talk to you, Bill Scher.
We'll catch you next week here in the DMZ.
You got it.